We ended with the French and Indian War. I had some of the things for the effects, but this first part was something I have not mentioned yet, but will be a major effect. The Albany Plan of Union. Now, this SFI is one that you probably don't recognize the name of, but do you recognize that picture? And this was a political cartoon, one of our first American political cartoons, drawn by Ben Franklin. And it is not with the Revolutionary War, as most people think. It was actually during the French and Indian War. Ben Franklin's idea was that the colonies need to join together as they are fighting with Britain against France. He came up with this plan to join together. But when everything was said and done, both Britain and the colonies didn't like his plan. Now, why did Britain not like our plan to come together?
Because it would be harder to control.
Yeah. They did not want to. We'd have more power. It would be harder to control as one. So that's something that, I mean, when we had the Dominion of New England earlier, Britain did not like that. They liked to separate it. Why is it that a lot of the colonies, though, didn't like Ben Franklin's plan?
Maybe they didn't really like some of the people had conflicting ideas.
Okay, conflicting ideas. And this is where you one more time would think of that, but it's actually the opposite of that. They felt there wasn't enough unity. So Britain thought it was too much, the colonies thought it wasn't enough. Which if you go to think about it, then Franklin probably had a pretty good plan.
Yeah.
He had something in the middle of it. But it ended up failing it. The long-term effect, though, of this plan, are we talking about joining together? The foremost American known in the world is Ben Franklin, and he is proposing that we come together. It doesn't happen, but we are talking about this. Now, the Proclamation of 1763 we had had before. What is the Proclamation of 1763? Yeah, you can't. So why does that make it mad when we can't move west?
Because we fought for that land.
Yeah, that was the idea. We're fighting for that land. Now, it is an example that we have that the British actually live up to their promise to the Indians. Now, one thing I'll tell you that a lot of you are mixing up the Treaty of Paris of 1763 with the Proclamation of 1763. The Treaty of Paris is what ends the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War. Britain gains the land, but the proclamation is by Britain afterwards. But that is one of the effects that you have. So for the Americans, we fight this war, we think, for that land, but we're not allowed to move to it. Now, I have on here colonists see redcoats. This is not something as concrete as the Proclamation of 1763. What are redcoats?
British soldiers.
Yes, it is the soldiers. Why are they called redcoats?
Because they wore red coats.
Yes. That was their camouflaged outfit. You wear a red coat with a nice white X on your chest. That is your strap on both sides. Great camouflage in those days, right?
Oh yeah, you never used them.
Didn't really need camouflage when you're fighting out in an open field anyways. But that's where the nickname soldiers were. Now, I have on there, they see the red coats. This is more one of the things that makes it different in psychology-wise. Some of you may have had it maybe in your neighborhood that there was this kid that was a year, 2, 3 older than you. And you maybe were always afraid of that big kid. Now when you get, as you've gotten older, you might even be bigger than that big kid was. And are you afraid of him anymore? Or her? And what had happened was, for years, we always heard as colonists, if you whacked up, all right, the king might send the redcoats, might send in the army. Well, when we fought side by side as volunteers with this army, were their soldiers really any bigger and badder than Americans? Yeah. They had nice little uniforms. They had nice equipment. They're pretty good fighters. But with a couple months of training, could the U.S. be just as good? Mm-hmm. So did we kind of lose that fear that we had always had of, oh, might send over those soldiers? Right. And maybe make us a little bit more willing to act up. Our territory gains. We went to 17 colonies. Now, how many colonies will eventually break away?
13.
Yeah, so where are the other colonies from?
No.
2 of them are in the north. What was Canada? Does Canada join with us to break away?
No.
No, they stay. As much as we keep thinking that Canada must be a part of us, twice we have gone to free Canada, and they have helped kick our butt back into the United States. There, the Revolutionary War and in the War of 1812. The other 2 colonies are to the south. What 2 colonies are to the south?
Florida and New
East,
Orleans.
East and West Florida.
All right, East and West Florida. Florida was, to the Apalachicola River was East Florida, and then there would be a line if you connected together the area of that like boot part of Louisiana with the top part of Florida, West Florida. So New Orleans was part of Florida at that time. Again, no longer it is. But that is where we have East and West Florida. And the one thing that kind of really ticked us off, which will be our next part, is taxes. We're going to have to pay for this war. And here's where we go for taxes. Yes, there'll be certain things, but now here's something that you need to know what the difference is. A direct tax and an indirect tax. What is the difference between a direct tax and an indirect tax? Mark?
A direct tax is something that said they just take like kind of like an income tax. They take part of your income or something like that, and they take it as a tax. And the other tax is like the Sugar Act is an indirect tax. Like they just put a tax on different products that you want.
Sorta, and it could be that way. The direct tax is you know you're getting it. All right, you know you're getting taxed on it. So that's why sugar tax could be. You could have it where you know, or it may not be in there. An indirect tax is built in. If you go to Walmart this afternoon and you get $100 worth of fishing tackle. So you go to the cash register, you hand them a $100 bill, you're good?
No,
Why not?
because you have sales tax.
All right, so how much you gonna have to give them?
$6.
Yeah, 106. You gotta give them $6 sales tax. So is sales tax a direct tax? Do you know you're paying it? Yes, you know that you're paying it. That is a direct tax. Now, you are actually being taxed twice though with that. Because any products that are made outside of the state of Florida have an excise tax of 10% when it's brought into Florida, which most of those products that are being sold at Walmart were made outside of Florida. That is a fishing tackle. Did you know that you were paying that if you're buying fishing poles, that there's already a 10% tax in there? So that's an indirect tax. Okay, the companies have to, when they are selling from one state to another, they have to pay a federal government that excise tax. You then go over to Murphy Oil, the Walmart gas. And I think this morning when I drove by, it was $3.29 a gallon. So I fill up Susie. All right, usually costs me right now about $60 to $70 for Susie.
$60 to $70?
It's a big moped. So I fill up the tank, and it says it's $65. Am I gonna have to pay that extra sales tax?
No.
All right, so there's no taxes on gas, right?
That's a lie.
That is a lie.
Of that $3.29 a gallon, how much of that is tax?
About 17%.
17?
I don't know, that's what the brother's
Last year we calculated it at like 7%.
Yeah, it's somewhere like around 85 to 90 cents right now, if I know right.
Wait, so is that indirect or direct?
That's an indirect because it's built into it. Yeah, if you don't think about I got to pay this extra taxes on there, but this is where you do have those taxes that are built in. So it will be more. It is, you are taxed on it, but you're not thinking about it added on like a sales tax would be.
Yeah, like whenever I went to England, everything's indirect.
Right, and actually this is what a lot of people are proposing for the United States to go into that type of tax that we have. That the more you buy is a consumption tax. The more you buy on there, the more taxes that you'll pay on there, not on income tax. So, but that's where the difference is. Now, the reason why I have that is you're going to see that some of these taxes are direct, some are indirect. What's going to make Americans more upset? A tax that they know they're gonna pay, or one that they supposedly don't know they're paying?
Both.
Alright, who said both? Okay. Why is it actually both? What makes them mad about a direct tax?
Because taxes are taxes and everyone hates them.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Yeah, we as Americans. So you go, you're buying some sugar, and you know when you buy that sugar, some of that tax is going to the king. Is that ticking you off?
A little bit.
So when you're buying other stuff, if you don't know it, then maybe you won't get so mad. Unless then you find out that, wait, there is this tax on this stuff. So the king's trying to trick me. It's kind of like, when you don't like a person, no matter what you hear about that person, you find a way to twist it as something against the person. And that's kind of what ends up happening for the Americans, where we don't like taxes. All right, Prime Minister Greenville. You don't have to know the name directly on this, but this is where you need to be familiar with it. He will propose all these new taxes with it. The Americans, we're going to have this saying that kind of emerges: no taxation without representation. The Americans felt that these taxes were internal taxes. So they should be able to vote whether or not. Greenville says, no, you're not getting these taxes for your roads, your schools, your local thing. You're paying for the king's protection that he gave you when France was a threat to you, or Indians were a threat to you there. But you're going to see this come up again later on. We have the Sugar Act that is passed. Now, Americans, we had gotten where we had loved our sugar. We actually had a lot of sugar come in. It was a direct tax. It actually wasn't made so much just to get tax money. It was more to stop the illegal trade of sugar that was with Spain and France. And I have the question on there. In many ways, it was an enforcement of what laws that were already there. Yeah, the Navigation Acts. Remember that word, solitary neglect? Well, now they're saying, here, we've had this law, let's enforce this law. And what happens when they start enforcing the law that has been there and our sugar goes up? You have to pay more for it. Yeah, we get mad about that. Eventually, it is repealed. All right, taken away. There you kind of see a cartoon that deals with
Is that
this.
the guy or a girl?
It was the guy.
Ooh.
All right, the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act itself, it is not a tax on stamps. When you pay the tax on a legal document, paper, you would end up having it stamped showing that you paid it. We actually have it today. If you get a loan, when you have to actually pay taxes on a loan. So you go and buy a car and you get a $10,000 loan, you will have to pay taxes on that. When you pay it off, you get these papers, and at the end of it, there are stamps that are on the papers that show that you have paid off that loan. They're called doc stamps, documentary stamps there. So we have that today in America there, but that's what it stands. Now, what's more important here? Circle this, highlight this. I know I don't have a whole lot of stuff for you in the notes to fill out in this section here, but the Stamp Act Congress is what's more important than there. What occurs because of the Stamp Act? We will have 9 of the colonies join together. They are protesting this act. We also have what is known with the skull and crossbones. A little propaganda there.
A little bit.
The Stamp Act. All right, skull and crossbones. Telling you it's bad. And we will end up having boycotts. Saying, don't buy things if you're going to have to pay this. How does a boycott work?
You get people.
Don't use anything.
But how does it work? Yeah, that's what you're doing when you're boycott. But how does it work? How does it stop something?
Like the businesses are losing money, so they're going to have to do what the consumer wants to keep making money.
Well, in this case, it's not so much for the consumer. The businesses were losing money, but who did they go to? Yeah, they went to the king. These colonists aren't buying our stuff. We're losing money because of your law. So they will end up repealing it. It works. So we as Americans, we have a tax on sugar. We cry about it. It's taken away. We have a Stamp Act. We cry about it. We boycott. It's taken away. Anybody see a trend of what's happening here?
Britain keeps giving in.
Yeah. So, again, boycotts, don't buy, don't do British goods. Sons of Liberty. Now, in American history, we look upon these as these great, noble men. they were fighting for liberty. They usually met in pubs. And you know, you get a bunch of men together and they've had a few drinks, they become smarter, or at least in their own world. They think they're smarter. One of these men that is going to be more famous will be Samuel Adams. But Samuel Adams' fame is actually more because of family and promotion. A lot of what the Sons of Liberty does that really makes the effect is by a forgotten man in history, Dr. Joseph Warren. He is actually the brainchild for a lot of things. But Samuel Adams will be known later on. He is more vocal about things in there. And you probably recognize the name of Paul Revere also. Now, besides the Sons of Liberty, we have the Daughters of Liberty. So we have the women. The Sons of Liberty, we've got these men, they come up with the idea, let's boycott everything. What did the Daughters of Liberty do?
Let's boycott everything.
Well, they boycotted it, but what else are they going to have to do to help?
Make their own foods.
Yeah, they're going to have to make a lot of those things that they're boycotting. Some of you might say, okay, wait a minute, so it's got a bunch of men, they're sitting around, they have these brilliant ideas, and who's actually doing the work to make it work?
Women.
So
All
would
right,
they,
the women, the
so
daughters.
they enforce the men's ideas, basically?
Well, they're the ones having to go. If you're going to stop buying fabric that's coming from the mills, then you're going to have to spin your own fabric. Of course it's not. Especially if you're Samuel Adams and you sit there and you have this brilliant ideas. All right, hey, let's have another round and celebrate. Right. It is very appropriate that we do name, we have the beer named after Samuel Adams.
I was just thinking that.
So,
Is that actually
because
his
he,
beer?
well, no, he consumed quite a bit of it. He wouldn't really like that beer because it was a lot lower in alcohol than what he would have wanted.
He probably
Why do I like Paul Revere?
All right, and this is where Paul Revere's real importance is not his ride, as y'all already know, that he gets caught early on. Paul Revere is actually going to be one of our biggest propagandists, and we'll probably finish today or first part tomorrow. We'll see one of the biggest things of propaganda that he does. But he is involved with this and trying to get this message out there. Now, our Paxton Boys. While the Sons of Liberty are in the cities, we will end up having a lot of the people in the rural areas. They are upset about what's going on in the cities. They feel that, and this is what's odd about this, that saying, no taxation without representation, that becomes popular. Some people say it is traced back to the Paxton Boys there. It was actually sown sometimes before that. But what is kind of seen as a back country. A lot of people that live on the edge of the frontier, like when we had Bacon's Rebellion, they feel like the rich people, the cities, they're not looking after them. They feel like I'm paying taxes, but I'm not getting anything in return. I go to a city and I see subways, I see all these sidewalks. Meanwhile, they won't even pave my road when I live out in the country. Why should I be paying all these taxes? So you will have this, and in America we have this part where it kind of feels like you're not looking after the people that live in the country. The Paxton Boys, actually, the no taxation without representation wasn't actually against the king to start off with, but it will be adopted from there. But a lot of our rebellion comes from those areas. Another person is Patrick Henry. And some of you may have in 8th grade had to read a speech. It used to be that one of the things you had to memorize in 8th grade history would be his speech, or the last part of the speech. This is another thing we've kind of changed in American history, as this was a stirring speech that he had, and he ends it with, "Give me liberty or give me death."
Not really.
In all actuality, his speech will probably be a lot like Obama's tonight to the State of the Union. It was a pretty long speech. People were kind of clapping politely. It went on a lot longer than it should. Actually, most of the things that we're saying when we're writing about that time period was a lot of people weren't even listening. They were just kind of going through as he went with this long speech. Wasn't really that stirring there. The next day, he actually realized, because he did say something along the line of "give me liberty or give me death," not exactly in those words, but the next day he did go and give a speech and say, "Listen, I don't really want that death thing. Okay, don't get me wrong. Okay, but his speech was printed and kind of transformed a little bit, reprinted and sent out, and people read it. And then in history, it became known as this great speech there. And once you could kind of read the words, and then if you think of it more dramatic there. But it does, even though, again, the Virginia Assembly, or what was the House of Burgesses, It is not as big as we've made it out to. The impact was actually bigger. Maria, you have a question or something?
So I was just somebody tried to that report last night. Patrick came in and it's basically the same thing. He was just like, he just gave like a wuss speech and somebody reprinted it and like changed all the words around and made him sound all strong and bold. And
Right, I
all
mean,
that.
you think, I mean, you can go and think about what you can do media-wise today. Where can you cut parts of things? And you might have an hour-long speech that is pretty boring, but can you splice things together and make it better? I mean, unless it's really horrible, then sometimes you can't even get that. But you can make something better and do it. And that's kind of what they did, except for they just reprinted it. All right, here is something that is a concept that you need to know. Notice how it kind of mixes back and forth, concepts with your SFIs. Virtual representation. This is what the British had. And this is what American had. We will claim for actual representation. The British said, we are giving you virtual representation. Now, the best way to kind of put this is, it is like what you have. Who in here is 18 and can vote? All right, so there's 2 of you. The rest of you, you have virtual representation. Do you have a say-so in the laws that are made that affect you? But yes, you do. Because who's representing you? Yeah, your parents are to help try to make the decisions for what's best for you. And that's why Britain kind of looked at things and said, America, we are looking after you. You're like a child. We're going to make the best decision for you. But for the Americans, we wanted actual representation. We wanted to have people that are truly over in Parliament and arguing our case and voting. That is what we really wanted. I have a question though. How would that actually be worse for them?
Because then they would just get shot down with everything instead of...
If they did have representatives to Parliament, what is their numbers going to be representing the 13 or 17 colonies compared to all of the people that live in Britain?
Very, very few.
Yeah, a very small percent. I don't know exactly, but it would be a tiny percent. Are they going to actually listen to them when you're that small of a minority in there? So it would have actually been worse for them. All right, the growing divide. Now we're going to go through, here are the acts that you must know. Again, I'm not going through every single one. We had the Sugar Act, we had the Stamp Act. We will then have the Quartering Act. What does it mean when you quarter somebody? Yeah, you house them. Okay, not the punishment quartering.
Oh, I was
We'll
gonna
get
say
into that
time to
quartering later
horses
on,
and-
but housing of them. Some ways it may not be that bad. So we'll have a little knock on the door. Officer comes up to the Cannon household and says, we have these 2 soldiers over here. For the next 60 days, by order of the king, you must house them, give them a bed to sleep on, and feed them 3 meals a day. No, girls, you cannot pick which soldiers you want to be living at your house. But that is where suddenly you have. Is the king giving you any money for this? No. The reason why they're doing it is to save money. Instead of them, they didn't build bases like they do today. You would have to have them in boarding houses. So they save money. Hey, let's have the colonists house them. Now, most of the British soldiers, most of them were not people that went and intruded, because most of them are common people. Now, are there always some jerks that are going to take advantage of the situation? Yeah, you're going to remember. But, Joe, do you think your family is going to, I mean, even if you have 2 nice men, they're young 20s, they might even say, listen, you don't have to actually give up your bed. We'll sleep on the floor in the living room. But do you think there might add to your grocery bill for the next 60 days? 2 men and their young 20s. So you have that added on. And they might say to you even, listen, you don't have to give us, don't worry about lunch and supper. We'll just have breakfast, okay? So in the morning before we leave, if you just have something little for us. But even if they're that nice and staying out of the way, is it still an inconvenience? And this is where you're upset about it. There. Yeah.
What did the soldiers do like during the day? So, like, did they
Well,
go farm or did they just?
No, and this
sit
is
around?
where you kind of, most soldiers end up having some sort of job. Maybe they work their shift guarding at the port, guarding the custom house, going to the courthouse. Basically, they're working a shift. And then for the other part of, whether let's say it's 10 hours that they have to do or 12 hours, but they're not sleeping the rest of the time. And do they really want to hang out at your house? So they have some spare time. What will end up happening, which will compound this, and this is where I say about part-time jobs. A lot of them will say, listen, I've got some free time. They go to one of the pubs and say, they go and say, listen, I know some bartending, and can I get a job here? And they'll work, even for cheaper money, because it's just a little bit of spending money for them. So you've got this person that's living in Joe's house, but now Kyle's, who was a bartender, his boss says, hey, you're gone. This guy's going to do it for less than you. So Kyle, you lost your job to the soldier.
How do you feel, Kyle?
Do you understand why this angered the Americans? Now, I think I have a question in your notes about what amendment would later show this. Not the first.
The third?
It's the third. Now, we as Americans, in about 2 weeks from now, you were going to write the Bill of Rights.
No.
Here. But our First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, press. We as Americans think that's important? Yeah. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. We love our guns as Americans.
Listen, I'm trying to
Yeah, so we have something important. Number 3 is no quartering of soldiers. Did this tick off the Americans that we would put that at the same level of speech, religion, press, and guns? There. We'll have that before you have to have a warrant in order to search my house. That tells you how much it irritated them. All right, the next one, man. Yeah. The Declaratory Act. The Stamp Act was repealed, but this was issued afterwards. Now, some of you have had this where maybe your parents have grounded you for something. And if you drive, one of the things that you have is, all right, give me your keys. You are no longer driving for the next 4 weeks. My son's about to have that happen to him and there. So, you lose your keys for that.
Can we watch you do that, please?
Actually for him, I'm just taking his driver license from him. So,
What do you do? Girl talk.
I'll stop recording. We can do this.
He needs to get his Spanish grade up.
Oh.
Can't imagine. Can't imagine him not
Mr.
being able to
Bass.
speak Spanish with me, right?
Yeah.
But
We need to move on.
some of you, your parents maybe have done that. So Jamie, you lost your keys for 4 weeks, but then you go and you've been grounded from your car. And you say, oh, Mom, you got to pick me up. I have band practice. I'm going to be after school afterwards. Oh, I've got soccer. Oh, Saturday we have this meeting I got to go to. I got community service.
See, that's what I do.
And your parents realize soon that this punishment is as much of a punishment on them as on you. And yes, you do work that.
My grandparents don't
So
care
what
about that, though.
happens-
They're like, as long as you're miserable, we don't care.
What ends up happening is exactly what a lot of your parents do. A week into that, here, Jamie, you can have your keys back.
Okay.
But I can take them away anytime I want.
But
Have
then
you ever
they
heard that?
all the time.
Yeah.
That is the Declaratory
But
Act.
she still
She's a really bad driver, though. She needs her keys taken. I'm just saying.
Britain repealed the Stamp Act, but said we can put it back anytime we want. They declared they're still in charge of us.
That's gay.
All right, now we get to the Townsend Acts, and this is one where quartering, kind of the definition given the declaratory. Townsend Act stuff. This is an indirect tax on imports. The indirect tax, they're trying to sneak one in where the Americans don't know it. They're going to have it, it's basically like a tariff. When something comes in the ports, we're going to do the tariffs, but the people that have it will raise the price, so everything goes up. What ends up happening is we're going to have more boycotts and more smuggling. More people breaking the law along the way. The Townsend Acts will then set into motion a whole series of things that we'll end up seeing. But before we get into the next act, though, we're going to have 2 ships you must know. The College Board loves these 2 ships. You got you, Tina?
I know like they don't like the quartering act, but did it like the soldiers for the
Well, again, it's kind of the idea. You're being forced to do something. Most of the time, for most of the Americans, again, there were the jerk soldiers, but most of the time it was kind of again, it's common people and common people. I mean, you have to obey the law. I mean, what are the soldiers going to say? No, I'll sleep outside. Bruin's got a great doghouse. No, they're going to, yeah, they might work with you, but that's where.
We watch Super Bowl.
So dumb.
Yeah. All right, the first ship you must know is the Liberty. It is owned by John Hancock. Do you recognize that name?
Yeah.
He will be one of the richest men in America. How does he get rich? He's a smuggler. That is how he gets rich. He smuggles things in. He is doing illegal activity. He's not paying the taxes. Since he doesn't pay the taxes, he can sell his items for cheaper than what the people are that are paying the taxes. Does Britain like John Hancock?
Nope.
No, he is evading their taxes. There. So they end up seizing his ship. They're actually looking for him. We're going to find in Lexington Concord. He's one of the people they're looking for. He is one of the top criminals that we have. Yet he will be the president of our Continental Congress. The British decide they're going to show of force. So that is where they end up sending 4,000 soldiers, which kind of compounding. How are they going to house those 4,000 soldiers? Yeah, another quartering act comes in, which is going to make the Americans even mad. And this is where, for a lot of the Americans, they're kind of upset that they're showing this with John Hancock. Which is kind of, you look at, that's kind of the American spirit, being rebellious. The Gaspee is another ship. Now, the Americans will go and attack a customs ship. A customs ship, that is a ship that is to enforce the laws. It is kind of, you kind of think of it as like a police car, except for a lot more expensive than just a police car would be, since we're talking about a ship. They set it on fire. Now, the Americans are upset that they are going to get punished for this. Ruined. So they're upset about getting, not only are they going to get punished, but they figured, oh, we'll have our jury just say they're innocent, except for the trial is sent to Britain. Now, here's where you've got to take the British idea that you have. If you are on a jury and you live in London, you are paying every single tax that these Americans have complained about and no longer have to pay.
Nah.
You now have some people that have evidence that they took in the King's ship, they destroyed it, a terrorist act.
Ooh.
If you're sitting on a jury and they're complaining about their taxes that you're already paying and at a higher rate, are you going to say, oh, they're innocent?
No.
And that is where they will end up being punished, but it's in Britain that they are then punished at. There. But we as Americans are upset about it. And again, and this is where I want you to kind of look in, if you were a British point of view, what do you see about these Americans? What are we acting like?
Children.
And what type of children?
The small ones, the really
The
mean
brats.
Yeah, the spoiled brat children.
ones.
What happens when we have something that we don't
Or acting
like?
Taylor.
What do?
We cry.
You get
Maybe
rid of
you do.
Yeah. And then we get our way and we do it again. And we're pretty much doing some terrorist type act. We're smuggling. I mean, if you're from a British point of view, all right, the Americans are doing all these illegal.
It's America.
All right, then we'll get to what, for some people, the turning point. And changing idea. I have on here is this the turning point. When we look at the Civil War, we can kind of see is the Kansas-Nebraska Act when it really is a change point, even though that's 7 years before the Civil War. For the Boston Massacre, a lot of people will go, and historians will say, this is when we will actually have the turning point that we're going to make our own country. Even though we will not declare independence for another 4 years, this is what changes the opinions of people. Now, what happened? What?
For the Boston Massacre, after it happened, didn't it just get blown up so much with propaganda?
Well, and that's what we're going to get into. First of all, the story for the Boston Massacre. We will have some soldiers that are outside, I believe it's the customs house or a courthouse. And what happened was all day long, Americans were out there, they were protesting. Now, it is not a nice, quiet protest. This crowd got bigger and bigger as you went along. And these soldiers that were there, they are getting yelled at, they're being cussed at, they're being spit upon. They are having rocks thrown at them, they're having bottles thrown at them. Our Sons of Liberty, all right, these guys, Samuel Adams, and these rabble-rousers, as they would actually be, are going back and forth from their bar, and they're actually, some of the people that are out there in this crowd are getting drunk, and they, again, are continually yelling at these soldiers. What ultimately ends up happening is we have one of the soldiers that is not only having stuff thrown at him, an American takes a club or a stick and hits the British soldier. When that happens, there is a gun that goes off. We do not know whether it went off from a soldier or someone in the crowd, but put yourself in the British soldiers. All day long, you're just doing your job, basically standing in front of this government building. You're getting cussed at, thrown at. You now see one of your soldiers, one of your fellow soldiers that's being hit by a person. And then you hear a gun go off. What do you think's happening?
They're rioting.
Start shooting into the crowd.
Yeah. So, and this is what ended up happening is they end up firing into the crowd. 5 Americans will lay dead. Now, a lot of people think, oh, it's because of Black History Month that Crispus Attucks is one of the 5 people that is now known and kind of celebrated. He is actually the first one that is shot. He is a black man, and it kind of shows here that we have Americans that are black also that are with this independence, but he is the first one that is shot. Now, it is a tragedy for what happens, but the name Boston Massacre was what it quickly got nicknamed. Makes it sound even worse. There will be a trial for the soldiers. And you might recognize the name of those soldiers' lawyer, John Adams. Mark, get your head up. Now, John Adams will defend the soldiers. And during the trial, he says, those soldiers are not guilty of those 5 dead Americans. Who is at fault, according to John Adams?
The Americans? The person who fired the first shot?
No, not the first. We really only know who fired the first shot.
The king for putting them there.
Okay, the king. Why is the king at fault? You said for putting him there. What do you mean?
Well, he placed the soldiers there, and then he infuriated the colonists by putting all this axe and stuff.
And this is where that was pretty much his argument. It's not these soldiers' fault. These soldiers would not be even here if it wasn't because of King George. He is the evil. Now, this is where you kind of see, and with propaganda, it is a brilliant move. You always want to have the face of the enemy being a certain person. When we were at war with Iraq, who was the enemy? One of the problems we have today with our war on terrorism and Al-Qaeda, we no longer have the face of the enemy because bin Laden is gone. World War II, who are we fighting?
Hitler.
Yeah, Hitler, Tojo. I mean, this is where you have that. You hate to somebody that it's not the Germans because, well, the German people, are they really that bad, or are they kind of like us, just speaking a different language? So that is where, propaganda-wise, you want here. And that is what John Adams does. He gets it where it's the king's fault. And everything that goes wrong, well, then it must be the king's fault here. So it's King George. Now, Samuel Adams, John Adams' cousin, will be the one that refers to it as a massacre. And here's where Paul Revere is truly important. Early on, he will make this sketch. And there will be reproductions of this over and over and over again and spread throughout the colonies. And our story about the Boston Massacre gets out first, not the British side of it. So we have the first story, which is what a lot of people believe. Soon after that, if you were to see a picture of this, make the British look pretty bad?
Yeah.
And so that is where the propaganda comes. And this idea, but now, and this is where, and this is why for a thesis statement, the idea is the king's fault. Now, going back to the Townshend Act. After a while, for all the smuggling, all the boycotts, the British repeal all the Townshend Acts except for one, and it's called the Tea Act. And what does the Tea Act do?
Tax tea.
Actually, it took away the taxes on all the teas, except for one version of it.
Oh.
And there, so because the Townshend Act, most of them were repealed, but there was some of the tea was taxed, some of it wasn't. And what would end up happening for the Tea Act is, if you were to buy from what was pretty much the biggest tea company in the world, the Dutch East India Company or British East India Company that it emerged into, it was cheaper even than smuggled tea. Now, does John Hancock like the idea that if someone buys tea that isn't being taxed, is going to be able to buy that cheaper than all the tea he has smuggled in from when he thought the tea was going to be taxed? And so we as Americans, what do we do when we have some tea that's taxed and some's not? What are we going to do with the tea that's not taxed?
Throw it in water.
Buy it.
We're not buying it, we're going to throw it in the water. It'd be kind of like you all if you were really upset because state of Florida adds a tax on Coke products. And so if you go to a Coke machine, you got to pay an extra 25 cents. But Pepsi, all the Pepsi products, you don't have to. So you decide to destroy the Pepsi machines. And that is what the Boston Tea Party was. We were throwing the tea in that wasn't being taxed. And in today's money, somewhere I read, when you kind of put it, it's over $1 million worth of tea that was dumped into the harbor. It's not like throwing it.
Why didn't they just like tax it though? Can they just put tax
Why they
in?
just seal
Well,
the
this is the idea that we come in that no taxation without representation. Parliament shouldn't do the tax without their permission. And that's kind of the idea they have. The other thing that plays into this, the king actually had a financial interest into the British East India Tea Company. So, do we like the king? Do we want him to make money? So that's where we'll have this. So we will have the Boston Tea Party. Now, they dump those chests in. Remember with the Sons of Liberty, where was their favorite place to meet?
Boston.
A bar.
At a bar. Do you think there might have been some alcohol involved in this decision?
No.
Plus, what did they dress up as?
Indians.
How long have Indians been gone from Boston before the Boston Tea Party?
Long time.
Yeah, a long time. Over 100 years.
Yeah, it must have been pretty
So,
trash.
so yeah, you get someone, I got a brilliant idea. If we put Indian headdresses on, they'll never know it's us. Okay, so they go and they throw it in. Now, if you are the king and you now got message back that these people in Boston have taken the tea that you're personally going to lose money on, but the tea that is not taxed and has thrown this into the harbor, how are you going to feel about it?
That we're idiots.
And this is where the king will have, and actually Parliament passes it, the king then is the one that enforces it, the intolerable acts, which are also known as the coercive acts. And you remember our event reports, I had both intolerable and coercive. Because the College Board, intolerable acts kind of tell you what they are about. But the coercive acts, not that they're trying to trick you, but they do try to trick you here. Now, the parts, there's a lot of parts to with this, with the intolerable acts. First part is, Boston, you got to pay for your damages. And actually, a lot of Americans agreed with this. Even Ben Franklin wrote and said, yeah, I understand what you're doing, but you were wrong. You need to pay for your damages. All right, that was not the right thing to do. And it's not like Ben Franklin was one person that's saying, oh, yeah, the king's right. But he said, he was one that kind of said, that was not the right thing to do. The quartering acts were expanded. And with the part there, until they paid it back, they closed the port of Boston. Now, how did most of the people in Boston make their money?
Ports.
The port, trade, fishing. No ships in or out until you pay this off. So the idea was, I'm going to punish Boston. Okay, you take that group of rabble-rousers, get them to me. You all pay for the damages they did, make them pay for it. And then you can get back on your life economically. Here's where they probably made a mistake. They went a little bit beyond just Boston, so they were punishing all of the state. Made it where the governor went and banned town meetings. So outside of Boston, in these little towns where they made their own rules, they're no longer able to do that. So if you are in little towns in New England, are you getting ticked off at the king because his governor is not letting you make rules in your own little town? And the king or the parliament actually gave more power to the royal governor. So in a roundabout way, gave more power to the king. Now, what happens with the, here's another one for a Quebec Act. I throw this one in here. There's a lot of these different little acts and taxes I haven't put in. But this was an easy one to remember. But this is where, for Americans, this kind of takes us off a little bit. Now, where's Quebec?
Canada.
It's Canada. After the French and Indian War, we got 2 of our colonies were the former French colonies in Canada, and the Quebec said they're separate. Okay, the 13 original colonies that you have, you all are on your own, but the Canadian colonies, they're separate. I said Florida was too, for East and West Florida, but no one really cared about Florida because we actually didn't mean a whole lot economically. Now, here are some SFIs that you know they are connected with this time period. Committees of correspondence. They had started before, but the Boston Tea Party and then the Intolerable Acts really get it going. What word or what does correspondence mean? Yeah, communication. So these are committees of communication. They're writing to each other. One thing that they're writing on is how do they help Boston? And this is where those smaller towns around were saying, don't pay for that tea. You need something, let us know. So they'd write. And then they would bring things in by land and help stand with Boston. We are starting to unite together along the way. And that is why is it important? And we're standing up to them. And they supported. This will then continue on even after this. Well, there will be more and more correspondence and more uniting. The next was the First Continental Congress. Sounds real important. It really isn't real important. Because the Second Continental Congress is the one that's going to be really important. But that doesn't mean that this doesn't have anything. Most of the colonies got together, and 2 things come out of this meeting in Philadelphia in 1774. The first thing is they said they're going to meet again a year later. And where the Second Continental Congress is important, that is where. They said, all right, let's get us organized. Make sure we get more organized with this, more people here. The other one was they did have something where they wrote the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, which is pretty much like a rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. We do have rights and grievances. These are some things we don't like what the king is doing. But one of the things that they wrote in a roundabout way had kind of said, if push comes to shove, we're willing to fight. They wrote it a lot better language than that, but that's what they said. Now, if you're King George, and now you get this little letter from this Continental Congress, is that kind of like a threat to you?
No.
No.
You're the leader of the most powerful country in the world. I mean, not too long ago, you just defeated pretty much the rest of the world when they were fighting you. I mean, the next powerful countries are France and Britain and Netherlands, and they were all against you, and you still won. And now you have this group of farmers and with pitchforks and shopkeepers that are telling you what to do. So for the king, kind of looked at things like, what's going on with these Americans? All right, this next thing, Revolution of 1774. This is something you normally don't hear. A lot of times we've tried to, and I know a lot of times make and splice things down and cut out things in history just to make it more simple. But this is actually, when we look at things, really something that is forgotten. It wasn't like in 1776 that our men got together in Philadelphia and said, hey, let's do this. It was already being done in here. But it was not any one major thing. It was over and over again. Several of the colonies kicked the royal governor out. Basically said, you're not part of us anymore. We're not, that is declaring independence. Kicked the king's representative out, set up their own representative branch or assembly, and said, we rule ourselves. They declared independence. All right, individually different people did. We will have a bunch of places that actually write what will be known as declarations of independence. John Adams, later on in history, where he will have some conflicts with Thomas Jefferson. He will actually accuse Jefferson that he didn't actually write the Declaration of Independence, but he copied in North Carolina, where the county of Mecklenburg had wrote their own Declaration of Independence, and that Jefferson actually copied the Mecklenburg Declaration. The other thing that we have here that is being formed with it are Minutemen. These are soldiers, and the name comes from 2 different things. One, they're ready to fight in a minute. The other is the fact that if you train right, you could load your gun in a minute. Now, the way that you loaded guns at that time, after you fired a shot, first thing you usually did, you took the ramrod down, you had some cloth in it, you go and you wipe out the barrel. Now, why would you do that first? Alright?
Because the way the shots were set up, it would corrode the whole inside of the barrel every shot.
Well, corroding is one thing, but there's another thing that could happen for the next step, though, if you didn't clean it out.
You could
It
blow it up.
explode.
Yeah, if there's any embers left, because the next step is pour gunpowder down in there. So if there are some embers, you might have a little poof, which isn't really going to hurt you. It might get in your eyes, bad smell for a little bit. And sometimes if you really are in a hurry, you could skip that step. Sometimes, not between every shot there, but you could do that. But then, after you cleaned it out, you poured the gunpowder in, you took your ramrod, you packed the gunpowder down harder. You then took what's called wadding and the musket ball. You push it down, you push the ramrod and make sure it's nice and tight. You then pull the gun up, you pull the halfway that you cocked this, you pour a little gunpowder in what is called the pan. All right, you don't want to fire half cocked there because then it won't fire. You then after you put it in pan, you pull it all the way back, which then opens up a tube. For then when you pull the trigger, two pieces of flint come together, they cause a spark right there in the pan, which makes an explosion of that gunpowder in the pan, which that explosion part of it goes down that little tube to where you have that packed powder. That packed powder does an explosion, and if you have it packed hard enough, then where your wadding and your ball is, it causes the ball to shoot out the other end. Now, it took me about a minute just to explain that. How long does it take to actually do it?
Same amount of time.
And that's where if you were trained really good to do it fast, maybe you could do it in a minute. And this is why, and kind of stepping ahead, why the style of fighting was. Since you can't fire a gun real fast, you march in lines. And this happened. Actually, if we're here with Rose, they're ready. They fire. They shoot. They then go, and their commanding officer in the back now tells them. All right, then it goes through the process, and they're reloading. Meanwhile, this line, they step forward. You shoot. All right, and then Jesse is going to tell them what to do. All right, the next line steps forward. They shoot, and then each line kind of goes through, where you make sure at no time is your entire army out. Because then you might be able to run. Think about the length of a football field. And that's about the length that most of those muskets could shoot. Can you run across a football field in 60 seconds?
No.
Yes.
If you
I sure
really
hope you
try.
All right, some of you might be able to
Yeah.
get it in about 11 or 12 seconds. All right, some of you might be able to do it at under 15. I think all of you could walk it in less than a minute. All right, so that is why you want to make sure that you have at least one line open at all times there. And so if you train to fight. Now, sticking back to this time period, if you were the king and you heard that different towns were actually getting these groups of Minutemen or militia, who are they training to fight?
The British.
You?
The British, your soldiers. If you're the king, do you like that idea?
No.
All right, a whole bunch of miscellaneous factors that will come into us with the declaring of independence eventually. I've mentioned before, we have more newspapers for people than what they had in Europe. We have more people, a higher percentage of people that could read. We have these journals, which are like academic journals that are going, and philosophy that is being passed around. So these ideas. Ben Franklin, with our Night Riders, has made one of the best mail systems in the world. We are able to spread these newspapers, this propaganda. Paul Revere's paintings are going around. We also have a lot of people in the country, rural areas that are very much against the British. And then we have the Scotch Irish people. Now, they are Scotch Irish. Some of them are Scottish, but for Scotch Irish, what ends up happening with them is when England takes over Wales and Scotland, they take some of the people that they think might be some of the troublemakers in Scotland and put them in Northern Ireland. So this is where you end up with this group of people, and some of you know with Scotland from the movie of Braveheart there, but this is where for those people, and then a lot of them, will end up moving to the rural areas, especially in the mountains of America. Do you think those people of Scotland and Irish background, do you think they like the English?
No. They don't like them to this day.
So these people all the time already don't like them. So this is where we're at. And we're going to find out in the war that these people will be some of the most vicious fighters. And we have this idea of an American person. That keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I know that's what I've been preaching to you all for everything we did this. What makes us American? What makes us American? By the time we get to 1774, are we different than our British cousins?
Mm-hmm.
How different are we? And that's what kind of has emerged out of here. Now, for the shot heard round the world, this is where you go back to kind of for 5th grade. Lexington and Concord. We will have the British general. He will hear about these different groups that are training in the outlying towns of Boston. He will also be looking for 2 of the biggest troublemakers there are, John Hancock and Samuel Adams. We know that the British are going to sometime go and try to find where they're storing up weapons. They're going to try to find Hancock and Adams. And so we have like this network in Boston and a plan to warn. We don't know what direction they're going to end up going. And this is where 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. And then when we know what time they're going, we send out people to warn. And who's the most famous person for the warning?
Paul Revere.
Yeah, Paul Revere, which he gets arrested, but he is the most famous because of a poem later on by, I think Longfellow was the person that wrote the poem. So who are the other two people that actually did more of the warning?
I can't remember.
Yeah, William Dawes. He's one that probably did the most warning in there. William Dawes, who was in our People Reports Group 2, I think we had in there. But that is where he is actually the one that warns. Samuel Prescott is the 3rd guy. Samuel Prescott. But again, Revere's name will be the one that rhymes the best. Now, these British soldiers, they march to Lexington where they have been told that some of these weapons are, and they find some Americans standing out at that Old North Bridge ready to stop them. Now, anybody here from Floral City? Anyone from Floral City? Or are you just not going to claim it? All right, but it'd be kind of like at Floral City, we've got a bunch of our guys in Floral City. They don't like what's going on, so they're going to break away from America, and they're going to form their own army. So they got their 4-wheel drive trucks, they're all jacked up, and they got their shotguns there, and they formed their own army. And so we then have come marching in a group of U.S. Marines. And they get to their Floral City with these guys and say, all right, y'all get in your trucks, go drive away. And this is the way the British kind of looked at it when they see these Americans there at this bridge. All right, we get the point. You're tough guys. All right, go. Leave us alone. All right, someone's going to get hurt. Now, what ends up happening is a shot is fired. Who fires the first shot?
Us.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, nobody knows. Now, according to our story, who fired the first shot?
British?
Yeah, the British. According to the British,
We did.
we did. Guess whose story gets out first?
Ours.
Yeah, our story. That whole propaganda, our story goes. We're defending ourselves. Now, for Lexington, it is not this great battle. All right, the British fire into the Americans, and 8 Americans are dead, and the rest run off. And how many British are dead?
None.
Yeah, none. If I remember right, there was one that was actually a little more serious wounded. Can you imagine being that one British guy? Okay, it's like, oh, Spencer, you got shot by an American. I mean, everybody would be making fun of him there. How could you get shot by an American?
Decommissioned.
Yeah. But this is where for Lexington, all right, it's not, all right, but it is the first shot. Again, who fired it? We don't know. They then march on to Concord. 10 another group of soldiers. Be kind of like they go from Floral City, they go to Hernando. All right, how many from Hernando? All right, so we have our Hernando group here. So we have that army that is there ready to fight our Marines. All right, you guys heard what happened in Floral City. All right, you're a little smarter, aren't you? But we have another conflict, and again, it kind of ends up in about the same way. Meanwhile, the British, when they find these buildings that supposedly the weapons are stored in, everything's been taken away. The Americans, we had a warning from William Dawes to hide it. They can't find Samuel Adams. They can't find John Hancock. But it's getting late at night, so they have to go back to Boston. Now, as they had left and went, they have to come all the way back. It's going in the afternoon. The sun is going down. They're marching on these little roads. Shadows everywhere. The word has gotten out about the British. And the Americans were coming and grabbing, and this discontent that they had, grab your children, go on a hillside, you see them coming down that side, here, take an aim. And the whole way back,
They're just
Americans
picking
are
them
just
off?
taking little pop shots along the way.
That's
which
awesome.
today, we would say that would be like a terrorist act. Except for they weren't planting IUDs on the side of the road. We were shooting these British soldiers as they were going back to Boston. And they would have over 250 casualties from, not from an actual battle, but pretty much, today we would call it terrorist acts of just taking shots along the way. This will actually end up being really representative of what will end up happening in the Revolutionary War. Because as long as the British stayed near the coast, they were safe and they won. But when they would go further inland and they would go where it was more rural area,
They hide behind stuff and shoot.
yeah, we didn't always fight fair, but part of this also was the fact that they did not have the protection of their navy. And so we will end up having that be. Now the real important, again, Lexington and Concord is the idea that this was the first shot, and that will be what launches the Revolutionary War. So I'm going to stop there.
Yay.
Which now